Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the New South Wales ACT Stakeholder Forum for the Energy Charter Independent Accountability Panel. In beginning the meeting, I acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. Just in introducing the panel, I'm Claire Petrie, the chair. I was formerly the Energy and Water Ombudsman New South Wales, and I'm currently involved with establishing a code for new energy tech. Cassandra Goldie, I don't think is with us at the moment. I think she'll be with us shortly, but she probably needs no introduction as CEO of ACOS. And Andrew Richards, who'll wave at us, is the CEO of the Energy Users Association of Australia. The panel has received disclosures from 16 signatories to the Energy Charter, and they are all available on the IAP website. So clearly the purpose of this forum is to hear from you as consumers and consumer representatives, to hear to what extent the disclosures from the signatories represent your experience during 2021. If we have people from the energy companies at this forum, they won't be speaking. They just want to hear directly from their stakeholders. So I've asked them to be on mute and off camera. In fact, this year, the CEOs asked if the stakeholder forums could be held first so that they could respond to what you're saying in these meetings with the panel before they have during their interviews with us. This is the third year of the Independent Accountability Panel's work in reviewing the disclosures of companies that signed up to the Energy Charter. Even though it's still a work in progress and things change every year, we hope that you share our view that the process has developed positively with shorter, more focused disclosures from signatories and a shorter, more focused report from the panel. As last year, we asked the signatories to provide a realistic and transparent response in their disclosures. We didn't want to see a public relations document or hear about actions that signatories have to undertake anyway by law or regulation. In particular, we asked them to tell us what it really means to put customers first in terms of the culture of their company, the involvement of their board and or senior management in the charter process, and their response to the recommendations in the panel's 2020 report. As we noted in our report last year, it's disappointing that AGL and Origin have withdrawn as charter signatories, and we commend Energy Australia as one of the big three for their continuing commitment to the charter as a charter signatory. In contrast, there are some large government-owned energy companies that have never been involved with the charter, a situation of poor sector leadership that, again, we note with regret. It's sad that in 2021, we're still talking about the impact of COVID-19, with everyone in Australia having been impacted. Individuals, families, businesses, some more than others. And again, sadly, there have been some natural disasters in some areas with serious impacts, including on the delivery of energy services. As a community advocate once reminded me, energy supply is a secondary problem if you can't afford a roof over your head, and housing stress for many people around the country we know is a real issue. To be honest, the themes of this year's report are likely to be similar to those of last year. Affordability of essential energy services, transition to net zero emissions by 2050 or sooner, with the consequent key issue that no customers should be left behind in this transition. So just before we turn the forum over to you, I'll ask Cassandra Goldie to talk briefly about the affordability issue, and then Andrew Richards will talk briefly to the energy sustainability and transition issue. So, Kat.
Thanks, Claire. Just checking sound is okay at your end.
Yes, that's
everybody.
fine.
Yeah, great. Good morning, everybody. I just acknowledging country. I'm on Gadigal land and pay my respects to elders past and present, and also great to see so many of you joining us this morning. I know that looking at who's in the room, the issues that we'll be discussing this morning are very, very serious, and it's been a particularly hard year, and I just want to acknowledge the hard work that everybody's done to continue to turn up and to do what you can, I know, to help try and get a better outcome for people, particularly those who are really struggling. And so as Claire suggested, I anticipate the panel, we particularly want to engage with you and of course with the signatories about what has worked in terms of providing better support to people, given the scale of the crisis that has happened over the last 12 months in terms of both the people's dramatic drops, often on a number of occasions, with their incomes, and, you know, in some cases, very little confidence that income will be restored for them, and coupled with, in some cases, a very dramatic increase in housing costs, and then overlay that with the energy bills. And so far, what we've been hearing is that we're very aware that there's a big energy debt increase that's sitting there, and that some of the measures that we may hear about, which have been important in protecting people, are not necessarily measures that are locked in for the long term. And so last year we talked about serious concerns about having a debt tsunami, and certainly want to hear from you about what you think has been important and positive from the different parts of this sector in terms of protecting people and supporting people who are more vulnerable, and also where you think clearly more needs to be done. We'll have very much an eye to what's needed over the next 12 months, and hopefully the panel's report will help to bolster some of the important priorities that you will be highlighting with us today. So thank you very much. Thanks, Claire.
Thanks, Cass. Andrew, would you like to just talk briefly about sustainability?
Thanks, Claire. And I'm coming to you from Wurundjeri land today here in Victoria. Yeah, look, the issues of sustainability and the energy transition are gaining even more traction even as we speak, at federal level, at state level, businesses and communities really moving towards a target of net zero by 2050. Sometimes it's difficult to talk about that when we've got so many issues associated with COVID and hardship that are right in our face today. And I guess we want to continue on that theme, in a sense that while we are dealing with not wanting to leave no customer should get left behind as we come out of COVID, we want to make sure that no customer is left behind in the energy transition. And I think one of the concerns that is buzzing around in our mind is that the transition could actually entrench vulnerability and hardship for a large group of customers who get left behind because they can't afford solar panels or Tesla electric vehicles or a whole range of things that are very exciting for a lot of people, but will be out of reach for also a lot of people. And we want to make sure, to the best of our ability, that the transition to net zero by 2050 lifts everyone up and doesn't leave anyone behind. So while we deal with the immediate issues of COVID recovery and vulnerability and the debt tsunami that is still coming, that people that we've been talking about, let's keep also an eye on what the future might look like and make sure that's going to be sustainable for everyone. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what everyone has to say, your stories, good, bad, or otherwise. This isn't just about beating people up. It's about also giving them a bouquet where it's deserved, and really hearing your stories and your ideas about how things can be improved as well. That's another great thing about these forums, is we get some really good ideas about what companies should be doing, which we can then reflect. So thanks, Claire. I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks, Andrew. Now, look, it's over to you to tell us about your experiences during 2021 and the feedback we can pass on to the CEOs of signatory organisations. Your input is really important for us in our critique of the 2021 disclosures. there are quite a lot of you, and it's always a bit hard to juggle on Zoom. So if you want to say something and I can't catch your eye, either send me a message through the chat or just speak up if you don't mind. And when you do say something, if you could just introduce yourselves and tell us where you're from. So,
Claire, if I may, I think it is possible for us to also capture your comments in the chat. I'm just checking that with the host as well. So Claire, that might also be a way that people can add additional comments for us, given the size of the room, which is great. We've got so many of you here.
Yes, absolutely.
So do use the chat as well. Thanks, Claire.
Yeah. So either way, but anyway, I'm going to open it up. And who'd like to start?
I'm Chandra Kira from Canberra.
Chandra?
Good morning, all. Thank you for the invite. I have got just a couple of comments. I had looked at the disclosure statements recently, and from ActuAGL. I'm quite pleased with the disclosure statement overall, and it seems to they have achieved a lot of things over the last year. But only concern I have is two concerns I have. One is that the language of disclosure is still pretty jargonist, especially when it comes to what they're doing to train their staff. It was very difficult for me to understand what's going on. So I would like if they can simplify a bit more their disclosure statement, make a bit more plain English type. And also, secondly, I could figure it out what they have achieved over the last 12 months, but there is no clearly identified evidence. They could have put it next to the statements. Here's the 5% of this and this we have achieved, or this is the 20% we have achieved, etc. If they had, highlighted those on the side or somewhere, that would have been very good, because it takes a fair bit of reading to understand what's going on. But otherwise, I think they have done a very good job. We are quite happy with the shop front they have opened. They call it Bar. We're quite happy with it because I think they were losing touch with customers. But now I think that's a very good initiative. And one final point is that their offers or plans to the customers is still pretty confusing, especially when it comes to tariffs. And I have spoken to a number of people, a few in my neighborhood. They still find it very difficult to understand what's going on. They have to call them, or still they don't understand what's going on. Especially if you have got solar panels and batteries, they just they don't know what's going on in terms of the tariff. Yeah, so these are my comments about their disclosure statements and overall service from ActuAGL.
Thank you, Chandra. That was very helpful. And I think in terms of your reference to confusion about tariffs, I think you've just spoken on behalf of millions of Australian energy consumers. So thank you for that statement. Jeff Buchanan, I can see you have your hand up.
Hi, my name's Jeff Buchanan. I'm from ACT Council of Social Service. So I thought it might be timely to join after Chandra in terms of ActuAGL, because it's definitely the dominant retailer in the ACT. I guess just to reflect on our engagements with ActuAGL and what's reflected in the disclosure statement, I think we did have very good engagement amongst the community sector in terms of monthly catch-ups and things like that around the impacts of COVID with their hardship team. So that was very positive. Definitely the work that they've been doing to commission some research around the impact of time of use and demand tariffs on low-income households or those with low energy efficiency has been very welcome as well. And they're going to be presenting some of the findings from that on a ANU seminar on Thursday afternoon at 4 o'clock, if anyone is interested in finding out more about that. So we've been very pleased with their engagement especially over the period of the COVID pandemic and the supports that have been available. I guess in the ACT, there's also been a lot happening from the government side of things that and also from the AER side of things in terms of the statement of expectation that's driven a lot of that as well. So it's kind of sometimes an issue of kind of separating out what's been a regulatory or government requirement versus what's been a business-driven approach to consumer-centered service. And also their engagement with the community sector around energy efficiency improvements has been very welcome as well. And that's reflected in their disclosure statement. I think, and reflecting on Chandra's point about the confusing nature of tariffs, especially in the impacts of time of use and demand tariffs, I think there's still some work to be done there to ensure customers understand what they're heading into in terms of those tariffs. And I think some of the one bit of language that I picked up from the disclosure statement that was, definitely framed positively, but in some way it raises kind of alarm bells, is when they mention about creating more innovative market offers. So I guess it's just a matter of just making sure that innovation is actually consumer-centered and not just adding more confusion to things. So that's something we'll be keeping an eye out for. That's enough for me, I think. Thanks very much.
Jeff, just before you do leave us, could you comment from the ACT in terms of the debt level for energy consumers? We understand that with COVID, the companies put a hold on disconnection and that some people might just be accumulating debt at a rapid rate. What's COS's experience in the ACT?
Yeah, we haven't seen I haven't seen a huge uptick in the debt levels, but it has followed the national trend to a certain extent, as far as I'm aware. I mean, there's a bit of a lag in the data that comes through. So I think one of the other things that I pick up from this process is that the retailers themselves have so much insight into what consumer vulnerability is and how it's experienced and potentially how it can be addressed. So I guess that would be one thing that I've kind of thought about through this process, is that there's a lot of potential for the retailers to actually provide more insights and recommendations and potentially to work with the community sector and research sectors to really get to the bottom of some of these issues. And so not answering your question directly necessarily, but yeah, it did flag another thing that I picked up along the way.
That's very helpful. Thank you. Look, on my list, I have...
Sorry, just Chandler here, just on a debt level. I think, yes, I don't have a direct experience also CODA itself in the ACT, but there is a hidden problem. I think I can sense it from talking to some people that, they are worried about what will happen after COVID in terms of the concessions, whether they will be able to get a bit more help or not. Canberra just gone through a very long winter and still going through it. And I think there are going to be a fair few people who will be in trouble.
Yes, that's what we're concerned about as well. Thanks, Chandra. Just in order of people who put up their hands, I've got David Haviett, Pete Newman, Ian Maitland and Simon Moore. So just keep putting up your hand or sending me a message and I'll put you on the list. So David Haviett.
Hi, Claire and everyone. David Haviett from the Network of Illawarra Consumers of Energy, very small group. I have one plea that I first want to make, which is that where we talk about the things people charge, can we call what we charge retail consumers prices and what networks charge retailers tariffs? I just think it's really important to keep a distinction between those two. It's become a mess with the tariff structure statements because too much focus is on how the networks are charging retailers and not enough on how retailers charge consumers. I just wanted to shout out and say that I thought, I'm only going to comment on two particular disclosure statements, Endeavour's and Energy Australia's, since Energy Australia is the only big retailer still with us. Validates my own choice of retailer, I should say. Look, I just want to say I was really pleased to see the piece in the Endeavour piece where they talked about the new ways to prevent customers from being disconnected, the knock before you disconnect program, which I think is a really great innovation, but I've got a question for Endeavour about how they imagine that will work in the world of more remote, more smart meters where they might not have to go and visit to knock on the door. And I had a general comment, which was I liked the fact that the Endeavour chart not only had it had both metrics for the achievement of targets under the principles, as well as the rating under the maturity model. And then finally on Energy Australia, I just found Energy Australia is very hard to read. That's all. I don't know why, but I did. It's too much green or something. Very minor comments.
Thank you. Thanks, David. Pete Newman.
Yeah, good morning. Pete Newman from CODA, New South Wales Council on the Ageing. I guess in New South Wales, we're just coming out of a 15-week lockdown, and I suspect that having been at home, that people's energy use will have gone up. This is at a time when, as the roadmap foreshadows, some curtailment of government support. So into the future, that looks a little bit anxiety provoking. I do energy literacy for the senior community, and I sense also, as Chandra and a couple of others have suggested, that there's considerable anxiety about energy prices. So I'm just a little worried that the future, as bills come home after lockdown and some of these items get rolled back, government support. I know the new Premier's announcing economic measures this morning, but the support is finite. The statement of expectations is finite, and I guess I just wanted to express anxiety about things going forward. It may be that things will snap back, but I suspect that there's probably, certainly among the senior community, a fair bit of reticence for a lot of people to get back out and about yet. So maybe the upswing might not be as great as government anticipates, and some of the supports might not be as adequate as we might hope they'd be.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That's very helpful. And I agree. I think there is a level of anxiety that we still haven't tested yet, and will probably come out in the next few months. Ian Maitland.
Thanks, Claire. Ian Maitland, I work as energy advocate for Ethnic Communities Council of New South Wales, but across the NEM more generally. I'm a member of a number of the of customer councils or their equivalents in the retail and distribution and transmission spaces. And what I've noticed, I think, over the last few years is faint glimmers of hope to do with called engagement, and more generally and more recently, quite a marked change in the way that energy businesses and agencies are viewing the particular and specific needs of called consumers. And that's a very, very nice thing to happen. I'm hoping to put myself out of a job before I get too old. But it's been, I mean, there are some noted problems to do with call engagement, one of which is language. And I think the most recent work by some of the DNSPs in language has been particularly seminal, because it's pointed out that that call consumers really value the ability to discuss complex issues in their own language rather than possibly their second, third, or fourth language. It's been a challenging time over the last couple of years, and more challenging for some than others. And in the communities where the languages spoken at home are not English, there's been some very, very glaring issues around translation and provision of information in language and misinformation in language as well, I have to say. Particularly stressful for those communities, and they tend, because there's a lack of understanding about the whole picture, because it is in other language, you get mixed messages coming out in the media about who's at fault here, and it's a mess. It's slowly, I think, clearing. There's been some good work done, but probably not enough. I'll end there, I think. My rant is over. But I have been pleased with the responses in the disclosures. Thanks.
Thank you. Well, we can always come back to you, Ian. Thank you. Look, we'll go to Simon Moore, and then David Javiet wants to just have a second go. He forgot to say a couple of things, so we'll come back to you, David. So Simon Moore, where are you?
Thanks, Claire. I'm from Business New South Wales, and I'm speaking mainly in relation to the 3 disclosures that I had the opportunity to provide early feedback on, those being Essential and Endeavour Electricity Networks and Gemini Gas Network. On the process, I thought over time that's gotten smoother, and this year seemed to be the most efficient of process in the years that I've been involved with this. I think really, as the structure has become stabilized, we've gotten a clearer idea of what the end product is intended to look like, and I think that's made the engagement on the documents a bit easier. I think there was one substantive piece of feedback that I gave to a couple of those organizations when they were making their disclosures that I thought was worth flagging in this venue to see if the group had thoughts on how it could be handled going forward. And that was how the disclosures and the scoring system handle intent, or kind of starting on various actions or reforms or changes to systems versus finishing them, and the results of those changes actually being ones that customers can then see, feel, receive. My view throughout, and the feedback that I provided to those networks was that they should only be really claiming it for scoring purposes once those pieces of work were completed, and that consumers were getting the benefit in whatever form that looked like. But there was some back and forth on whether beginning the process was the right time to score those, or whether the end of the process was. And I'm conscious that I've had the chance to speak to those 2 or 3 networks, but there may be others around the country who are scoring themselves potentially on a different basis. And so maybe in the interests of consistency, or providing better guidance from the top of the council and this process, it would be useful to have a firmer steer on which way declaring businesses should go on that.
Simon, does that seems to imply you think there's a form of double counting on the benefit then?
Well, not necessarily, more early counting, I think. So you just take, as soon as you start on some reform to your business practice, you then say, right, take it, that's being done now. Even if it's going to take 3 years till any consumer is going to see any impact from it. So yeah, I think that was my view, was that was probably premature to be counting it or scoring it. It's good to report on it and to let us know that it's happening by all means, but to be saying, giving yourself a gold star for it, as I say, maybe a bit premature.
A score on the result, not the process necessarily.
Correct.
Yeah.
Simon, do you have a comment on the affordability issue for small business in New South Wales?
Yeah, I mean, at the moment, I think it's very much tied to what happens with business reopening more broadly, and how the business environment unfolds. I think, issues with energy are part of a wider set of cost and affordability issues that businesses face at the moment. Being 2 days into the kind of staged reopening that we're going through, it's probably a bit premature to say that we're out of the woods yet, or things are going badly. It's a pretty uncertain time right now, and so I think we're very much in keep an eye on everything, wait and see what happens mode. I would be wary of some of the supports that have been put in place, particularly around disconnections and around having the ability to arrange payment plans on fairly favorable terms being withdrawn immediately and precipitously. But I think we should hopefully get to a place over time where those can be withdrawn in the early part of next year.
Thank you. Now, I'm going to just keep moving through everyone unless there are questions. So please, if I move too quickly, just interrupt me. So I'm going to just go briefly back to David Haviett.
Thanks, Claire. Look, I will also preface this by saying that I've come to thinking about energy charter issues late, because in my previous incarnation at ECA, there were more than enough people worrying about the charter without me paying much attention to it. So it's a relatively new piece for me. There's three extra things that I wanted to say, two that I meant to say before, well, two that I didn't mention. The first is a general commentary about the COVID response. There's a degree to which we've dealt with the COVID response as being something novel and new, but in reality, mini COVIDs are occurring every day in parts of Australia. There's a factory closing here or whatever. And so it'd be interesting to see the lessons that business thinks they've learnt from the COVID experience that they're going to be able to apply in business as usual for issues of vulnerability. In other words, not just say COVID's behind us, we don't need to do those things. What are the deep lessons? And I didn't see any of that in the disclosures. If there are, I apologise. The second one is generally a piece about putting customers at the centre, because there's a couple of things that got mentioned in the intro about things like housing, and indeed the issue of affordability being the gap between, for me, the affordability is the gap between income and cost. And I think there's a place for industry to, in fact, join with consumers and adding their voice to consumer advocacy issues. That would include things like joining with ACOS in making the case that affordability of electricity means a reasonable new start allowance. It means advocating about the questions of thermal efficiency of housing, and the fact that industry could be pointing out to government that there's nothing they can do about thermal efficiency of housing, but there is one thing industry could do, which is you can do very good studies with smart meter data and weather data, especially if you also know the fabric of the housing, to identify leaky houses because of the slowness of the thermal response. I know the New South Wales government has looked at that a bit, but industry could lead on that and provide good, strong data to government about what the magnitude of the problem of poor quality housing is. And the third one was the piece that sort of on presentation in general, and I want to generalise that. The disclosure statements have all been well put together with using clearly somewhat the in-house graphic designer. But I mean, first of all, I'm too old. I still read things linearly, and graphic design often gets in the road of my reading. But more generally, if you're trying to read multiple reports that are mostly covering the same thing, but you've got vastly different graphic design approaches to them, it actually makes the task of reading the documents harder, not easier, if you've got lots of graphic design work going on. So it's a pitch to the charter as a whole to say, can we sort of either standardise or wind back on a little bit of the graphic design work to make some comparators between people Not that we're trying to sort of set you off against each other. It's even sort of to be able to aggregate rather than compare. It's hard to aggregate the data in this mode. So those are my 3 extra pictures. Thanks.
Thanks, David. That's very helpful.
On that one, sorry, Dave, sorry, Claire. I think we agree with you. I mean, both Cass and I have read probably 50 odd of these things now over the last 3 years. So part of the maturity framework was to try and get some form of consistency and consistent matrix. It is always going to be difficult because everyone has their own style. Is that something you think the panel could synthesize as part of our report, perhaps?
I wouldn't think that the panel should necessarily take on the piece of work to do the panel. I mean, I think there's this goes to some of the other questions about other roles of the Better Together projects in general. I think it's a Better Together project that the Charter needs to initiate. Similarly, I think the Charter needs to, go back and do a bit more work on their consumer engagement framework, which is still looking, well, could be denser, let me say, have more content. So I think there's still lots of other work in the Better Together mode rather than the panel.
And presumably for participants in this process, your ability to do your own analysis in order to provide input into the panel means some standardising of the reporting in the disclosures is really helpful for you.
Correct.
But we could definitely, David, take on board through the panel report, for example, some suggestions about where we think the presentation has been particularly, great practice. Yeah. And maybe with, Sabine and others consider with the council, Claire, picking up some parts of the disclosures that actually we could standardise and every participant could use that format. Given the number of designers who've had their beautiful hands on the presentation of, for example, the maturity model and, some of the particular metrics associated with different principles. So we are comparing like with like. So we can certainly consider that, I think.
Thanks, Cass. And I just, in moving on, I'll note a comment from Ian Maitland reminding us of the large proportion of CALD members who own small or medium enterprises. And so there is that mix of the issues for small business, but for people whose first language isn't English. Now I'm moving on to Tai Lin Nguyen, and I'm sorry if I've mispronounced your name.
Thanks, Claire. I'm Tui Lin Nguyen. I am a community organiser with the Sydney Alliance. I work on a project called Voices for Power, which aims to build power for migrant communities across Sydney to have to be able to communicate their own voice about their own concerns about the energy system, about energy transition, affordability, and climate. And so rather than speak to the disclosures specifically, I wanted to really speak to the systemic problems that we are seeing, and we a call out to the Energy Charter and energy businesses to really think about these issues as interrelated and systemic, and the need for really careful consideration of all these different aspects when we are making policies to engage with customers, and especially customers from non-English speaking backgrounds. So COVID, this time, the second wave in Sydney at least, it particularly hit 12 Western Sydney LGAs. These are LGAs of concern. And no surprises that these LGAs, including Fairfield, Blacktown, some of the biggest LGAs, but also where there's a high density of our culturally and linguistically diverse communities live. And there's no coincidence to that, right? There are intersections of disadvantage there. Intersections around affordability, one. Housing affordability in Sydney is terrible. And so a lot of our communities who are from lower socioeconomic backgrounds have to move more and more to the west. A lot of our communities are in more insecure or jobs that means that you cannot isolate at home. So that's why COVID even though it was like some of them really restrictive lockdowns, COVID still spread around those LGAs, intersections around so job insecurity, about affordability, and also let's not forget race as well. And so that meant that the health messages and I think the shortcuts the New South Wales government took to try to communicate to people about COVID did not work with our communities who needed extra support to be able to access a health system that is made for mainstream communities who understand and have a command of English, right? And so all those intersections together meant that our communities were hit hardest and then were policed out of this lockdown. Police and the military sent in, right? And so, but also we can also see that around affordability, around like job insecurity, around around communities being able to engage in a system that is complex, and also especially when they don't have like a fluency in that language, means that those three disadvantages also cut across into the energy system, right? And I think this is when we have to also think about like sustainability and affordability is wrapped up in the same sort of issue, I think, for us in Western Sydney, is because Western Sydney is also some of the hottest places in summer. The heat waves there are longer, more severe than in eastern suburbs, and that's because of the geography we are in. And so therefore climate change and climate mitigation and the role of energy businesses in sustainability and our net zero future is crucial to these communities as well, our communities as well. So it's not atomizing, I guess, like this is our role as an energy business, we only care about affordability in this way, but it's also being attentive to the needs of communities to experience further barriers to engage. And also just beyond all those, that I guess of objective analysis of the layers of disadvantage our communities face, our communities also stepped up during the pandemic. That, you know, churches are being open to vaccinate people, like priests, like our sheikhs, our community leaders were saying, go get vaccinated, stay at home. This is what you can and cannot do in language. And so another thing is that community can be partners in this, right? We can't just look at them as consumers over there and us as businesses. We have to work with them hand in hand. And as the climate, you know, continues to warm, more crises are going to happen. We need to be able to respond in a way that supports communities to weather the crisis, but also build a future and a system that everyone can access. COVID just has exposed the disadvantages that were already there. And so I think it's really important for the Energy Charter, and hopefully, I think it sounds like there is indications of being able to see these issues as interrelated. But I just wanted to speak to the experiences of our communities we work really closely with in Western Sydney that just came out of really terrible experiences. I also want to throw to my colleague Lena, who's been working with me on the Voices Powered Energy Training Program, to really share from her community, like the Chinese community, what it was like. And I want to invite her to speak now.
Thanks, Tui. Hi, everyone. My name is Lena Champan. I am a community organizer from Sydney Community Forum, and I work for Voice for Power and work with Tui, so she's my colleague. From the training, I mainly work with our Chinese community here in Sydney. So from our trainings in the past, we realized our community people, they do have a lot of knowledge in energy, and they have a lot of experience since they immigrated from our own country to here, but they just not confident enough, lack of confidence to advocates for themselves. Quite a few reasons, maybe language barrier, or they never had a successful experience with negotiate a better price for them, for their family. So or they don't know what to do. They don't have the knowledge to negotiate, how to discuss with the energy company. So all these issues make them left behind of the like energy system. So through the training, we walk people through from the energy system, then we teach them one by one how to read their bills in our own language. And also we teach them how to use energy safely, how to communicate with the energy retailer and the distributor. So we teach them like nearly everything. So after the training, the feedback I heard from my community, they are like, wow, Lena, I have been immigrated to Australia already like 20 or 30 years. I have been living in this country. I have been working, contributing my tax, everything, but I never ever had a chance, an opportunity to get a training, get to look through energy system or my bills this carefully before. Like I never had an opportunity. So once we have done that, we realize this model and what we're doing is really working and making a big difference for my community. Sometimes I got a phone call from my the training participant before, and they said, Lena, after the training, I really ran up my energy retailer and I got a better deal through the knowledge you provided to us from the training. So I'm thinking, wow, this is like really, really impressive. And also I think our community people, they do have the passion for the climate change. They do have the passion to participate in the system. They just haven't been given this opportunity and the chance and the knowledge like how to do it. So I think our job, our role in this, obviously we need to advocate for our community, not just Chinese community, other like culture and background, diverse background community too. So we are a big portion of the energy consumer, so we can be a big portion of energy participator too. So yeah, so that's my point. I think, yeah, it is worth to put attention and listen to our voice. Thank you.
Thanks, Lena. I just wanted to add that this project, the Voices for Power Energy Training Program, is a collaboration with a few, signatories of the Energy Charter, like Ausgrid, Endeavour, and Gemina. And I want to call that out because that is actually in practice, like energy companies working hand in hand with community to create a great program that is already having really important impact in training up and skilling up and building confidence in our communities to engage in the energy system. And so I just wanted to really hope that we can see more of that across the system, because I think our communities know our communities best, and it's good to work with them before a crisis to be able to find solutions that work to respond to those deeper root causes of our lack of access to the system. And so thanks, Lena, for sharing those reflections.
Thank you. You've raised so many key issues, and certainly one of them is something that the panel has been aware of very strongly. And I think the Charter signatories are that these problems are massive and they go across so many different issues, and they're not going to be resolved by one group alone. It is about partnerships, working together, involving customers, hearing the voice of customers, as you're saying. And overcoming some of the barriers, including language and lack of experience with energy issues. So the work that you're doing is really important. So thank you. That's a very important contribution. Are there any comments on that from anyone before I move on?
Yeah, and Claire, I've got a few comments, but it's such a great group that we also want to make sure we hear from as many people as possible. Just on those comments, we did last year certainly put into our report a strong call out for greater support for community-based partnerships and resourcing of that kind of partnership approach. I'm just interested if you've seen any positive progress on that front. And if there's anything you would specifically like to ask the signatories to do more of over the next 12 months to support this kind of community-based partnership approach. Thanks, Claire.
Thanks, Cassandra. Yes, saw that there was like $1.5 million, I think, put into more community, programs. I think that's really great. I think more support, more resources is going to be great, but also I think it'd be really good to be able to co-design what those projects could be where it's most needed. Because I don't really know where these projects came from. They all look great, and I know that Uniting's doing great work and doing over-the-phone energy efficiency audits and things like that, and that's really, really good. But I wonder if there's a more, I don't know, a bigger sort of pool of money one, but also a process in which we as community can feed into what is most needed, to be able to design that all together, have voices at the table that aren't usually at the table. And so, yeah, that's my 2 cents, I think.
And I'll take it that you weren't given the opportunity to have a voice on how to design those kinds of initiatives, and that's what you would recommend be done.
Yeah, definitely. Or have it like encourage to have a co-design component to each of these programs, because the more we can involve consumers in the design of it, the more we know that it's going to be well targeted and well designed. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Evelyn Rodriguez.
Hi, I'm not from an advocacy group, but I just wanted to say how wonderful it is listening to your voices. I'm from the Water Services Association, and we're like the water version of the Energy Charter. And so I just wanted to say that we've got an MOU with the Energy Charter, and listening to your voices, one of the things we're most keen to develop is to hear about the partnerships, not only with the community, but to see how water and energy can better work together. So we've started some of those things with cross referrals. When a customer rings an energy company and has an issue, they'll refer them off to the water company. The other thing is to create a better experience so the customer doesn't have to try and find the equivalent in a water company as they did with an energy company. And some of the community partnerships you're talking about, we're working on. If it works in energy, it's probably going to work in water too. So let's try and bring a little bit of consistency with the customer experience when it comes to vulnerability or affordability. Similar type, better access to concessions and government grants. So you don't create this confusing minefield that customers have to wade through for energy and in water because the experience is so different from them. So some of the ways we're doing that is we're trying to translate, look at our measures that we're using to track our progress and to report back to the community and to governments. So water's borrowed a lot from energy in that respect. We've been looking at the maturity framework that you're measuring for the Energy Charter, but we're also looking at adapting that for water as well. And one of the most important things is water is a little bit, we don't have a lot of data on our customers. So one of the things we're trying to find is be a bit more proactive in reaching out to those customers. So if we can create that trust between energy customers and water customers, that trust between energy companies and water companies that share the same customers, we're not contacting the same community organisations and the same customers twice. We're sharing that data, and so we can offer those services in a bit of a better way. So that's just started from May this year. So this has been really, really useful for us to hear about some of your experiences, and I'll definitely be taking that back to the water company. And hopefully next time the water companies will be sitting into this room and listening at the same time, so you don't need to speak to them twice. So thanks very much. I'll hand across to the advocacy organisations.
Thank you very much, Evelyn. And we're talking about two essential services: a roof over your head, then electricity and water. They're the essential services. So it is a really, really important points. All right, time is marching on. I think Pete Newman, did you want to say something else? You've still got your hand up.
Yes, thank you. I think the work of the Energy Charter is extremely important, both on a micro and macro level. Micro in terms of the impact on health and welfare and household finances and the like, and also at a macro level in respect of emissions and climate change and those issues. I was disappointed when I noticed that this year there were less signatories than had been the case previously, and particularly in New South Wales, the withdrawal of a couple of major players, which I think you spoke to earlier on. My own experience was in developing external survey with the health industry, and I worked for some time in an external survey with the Australian Council on Healthcare Standards, which was a national body. And a lot of the work that was done there to make that sort of system mandatory really across hospitals, which felt and healthcare services felt in the end that they had to participate, was one because of the strong industry uptake, and also it was supported by some government requirement for funding that those services should be accredited. But the process of establishing those standards was done by having players across the industry come together and develop a workable set of objective standards that people could be measured against, commended for, and improvements suggested on. I think it would be wonderful to see that sort of thing emerge with the Energy Charter, where organisations felt obliged to sign up. The signatories have done some very good work. There is some particularly sophisticated work gone into preparing the disclosures. Code of New South Wales is one deep, so I've had to look at a number of New South Wales disclosures. Some use measures like the frequency and duration of outages as one example, and others don't. So comparisons are difficult to make, and that makes obviously suggesting improvements difficult to make. We'll gather nationally and prepare a response. I'm in touch with CODA advocates across the nation, and we'll combine to address a response. But yeah, I think there's a lot of good stuff in the disclosures. I have the impression that some of it may have been written more by the marketing department than the quality assurance department, but that's again, there was very much good work done there. I'm involved with a couple of energy organisations, and I have seen very real efforts to engage with customers, and I'm pleased to note that. But again, I support what David had said earlier. Some more objective measures would certainly help us in the limited time and energy and space that advocates have got to address the process.
Thank you. Very, very important points. Thanks, Pete. On my list, I have Jeff Buchanan, Tanisha Amos-Hampson, and Paul Brownlee. So we'll go to you, Jeff, first.
Thanks again, Claire. Yeah, and it kind of relates a bit to what Twee has been talking about, and Lena as well. In the ACT, I guess we seem to be a very specific case in terms of how our energy is, the retailer and the network is all set up in terms of it being the former public or state utility provider has become a more market-based one, but it is heavily embedded in the community in terms of where ActuAGL is. So it has, and it's probably got a much smaller boundary that it works within. And I guess my interest in terms of what the panel sees in terms of, you have this oversight of what's happening across a much more diverse range of scenarios in terms of both retail and networks. And to kind of get a sense of, from the ACT, I see us as having an advantage in terms of ActuAGL, in that it is able to, and it has long-standing relationships that it's built over time. And what we probably are most challenged with is with the new entrants in terms of retailers, especially in terms of Energy Australia and Origin, for example, as the two next bigger retailers. In terms of, we don't really see it as, get a sense that they're trying to develop connections with our community and to establish relationships with community organisations or provide ACT specific kind of programs that align with what our government's trying to do in our own jurisdiction and things like that. So that's just to flag something that I know it's out of the question in terms of Origin now, but in terms of Energy Australia, it'd be something that we'd be interested to see how it might work towards establishing better community connections as it becomes an increasing kind of market share of the retail market here.
Thanks very much, Jeff. Tanisha Amos-Hampson.
Hi all, I'll just apologise, my internet's a bit unstable at the moment, so I'll keep my video off this morning. But I'm Tanisha, I'm new to the Energy Charter and also new to the energy industry. I'm working for Energy Consumers Australia as a graduate policy officer. So as a fresh pair of eyes, what stood out to me reading through the disclosures were the ones that really clearly outlined impact. So they had what they did and then why they did it, but then also that next step of the tangible outcome and the impact. And some of the disclosures I felt were missing that final step. And the second point I'll make is that I'm interested in the increasing DER uptake by consumers. So there were a few DER related trials present in some of the disclosures, but given the system restraints with increase in DER...
Sorry, Tanisha, don't assume DER is familiar to everyone.
Oh, sorry, distributed energy resources, so things like solar panels, batteries, which are consumer-owned assets. So given the context that increasing consumer-owned assets and these DER systems that are being fed back into the grid, there's talk at the moment about third parties controlling these assets. So in this context, there needs to be social license. So I feel in the disclosures, there might need to be greater commitment to building and maintaining a social license with consumers. So that would be my comment there. So increasing trust within consumers and the energy industry more broadly.
Thank you very much. Paul Brownlee.
Yes, thank you, Claire. I'm representing NECA, the National Electrical and Communications Association. So just on behalf of Ollie Judd. Yeah, it's a hard one for us because we represent a national view. So not having all distributors in the same charter makes for different experiences, I guess, from our perspective. But we've noticed an increase in communication with those companies that are on the charter, the likes of Ausgrid, Endeavour and Essential. We have regular correspondence with them, which is great, but I can't say that we have the same relationship across the board, which is unfortunate. But in reading the disclosures earlier in the week, there's not a lot of talk about and not a lot of discussion in there about how they're going to communicate with the contracting fraternity, if you like. So, I mean, contractors have a lot to play in doing some of the work for distributors and some of the heavy lifting for distributors and a lot of the energy efficiency and more affordable housing and things like that. So it would be nice to see them recognised a little bit more in the Energy Charter. That's about it from me.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Tanisha, you still got your hand up. Did you want to say something else?
No, sorry, not all good.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, I can't see any other hands. So Cass or Andrew, did you have any comments you wanted to make on any of the comments so far?
Yep, thanks, Claire. I particularly am keen to, and I think one of you made a very important point, of course, that the experience of COVID in terms of energy affordability is significant because of its scale, but the experience for an individual is not unique. In other words, people lose jobs, housing prices and costs go up, and affordability for that individual can be a chronic situation. So, of course, I think we are, as a panel, also looking for, with the, a work that's been done over the last 12 months from signatories to address and tackle affordability. What would you particularly like to push to become a systemic response rather than a one-off emergency type measure? Thanks, Claire. That's a further question. We particularly want to pull out those parts that, where you think you understand that the measure was temporary, or we go, no, this is what should have been done, and we would like to see it embedded ongoing as a systemic response of protection for people who are at risk of being disconnected.
Kate Healy, I think you'd like to comment on that.
Sorry, I'd like to comment, but not on that.
Okay, that's fine. Absolutely, go for it.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to raise the issue of transmission social license. I work for RE Alliance, which is a small environmental NGO, and we released a report recently on looking at the issue of landholder, like getting better social license in the transmission sector for the rollout of the integrated system plan transmission projects. And we've had a really positive experience, particularly from some of the Energy Charter signatories from Powerlink and Transgrid in particular. And I know AusNet is looking at potentially signing up to become a signatory in the future. But yeah, I just wanted to raise the issue that there's some particular problems with the rollout of the transmission projects, likely if social license issues aren't addressed, and this could lead to delays in the projects going ahead, and substantial problems for power security going forward. So I guess we were promoting increased landholder compensation arrangements instead of a one-off easement payment. We were looking at the example of the wind industry, where you might actually have some lease payments over the course of the asset's lifetime. So increased landholder compensation, some also some neighbour compensation for people who are visually affected, and some community benefit sharing programs in for the wider community. And this would bring the community along so that transmission projects aren't just seen as a burden for local regional communities, that they're actually getting some of the benefit from them as well. So I just wanted to signal, I guess, that there's some really good work going ahead. There's some issues that some of these things need to have some changes potentially due to the National Electricity Objective, and if you increase landholder payments, obviously the efficiency for all consumers as a whole could decrease, like it would have negatively affect people's bills and make them go up a bit. But we see that just rolling out these projects in a timely way could also benefit consumers as well. So those are just some issues that we've been flagging recently, and we've been working with some Energy Charter participants in.
Thank you. Andrew, did you have any comments on that?
Oh, look, thanks, Claire. Kat, I think you've hit one of the big nails right on the head there, is that we're, at 22, 23% renewable energy penetration at the moment. Under net zero by 2050, you're probably going to get close to 100%. So there's a long way to go. That's hundreds of billions of dollars of new investment. It has to go somewhere. A lot of it will be on people's roofs, but also substantial amounts will be in their community. And I think you're absolutely right that if we don't get social license right, if we don't get equitable outcomes for landowners and communities and neighbours, then the transition is going to cost a lot more, and it's going to take a lot longer. And one of the things that we should also be concerned about is that people actually lose confidence in the technology that's being deployed. And that's the last thing that we want to see. So I think you're right. I am hopeful that a lot of the transmission and distribution companies, because they'll actually have a big role to play here too, are starting to take social license much more seriously. Not that they don't in the past, but I think they need to take it even more seriously. Because the greatest risk, I think, to the energy transition is social license, and we need to get that right. So I applaud the work that you're doing. A lot more work needs to be done.
Thanks, Andrew.
Can I on that same topic, Claire, is Paul Brownlee still on the line? Because Paul, I think you raised a really good point around contractors, it being a delivery end, and how the industry needs to work a lot closer with your guys on delivering a lot of these DER and other things, and there needs to be a stronger relationship. Is that what you're heading?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we see, and I've gone from New South Wales, and I will put my hand up. I used to work for Ausgrid. I was employed by Ausgrid for 27 years until early this year. So I am sort of have a fairly good insight into how distribution companies work. But it's funny coming to a contractor association and advocating for electrical contractors and seeing the disconnect that's there somewhat. Even thinking that Ausgrid does a pretty good job at contacting their contractors, but yeah, you see it from a national perspective, it's a lot different. But yeah, I agree, Andrew. If you can bring the contracting fraternity along the journey with you, I think it makes it a lot easier to deploy DER and a whole bunch of other behind the meter solutions for customers to save on electricity bills and make it more affordable.
Because we have talked about, because more and more of the energy businesses are using subcontractors to do what was standard work, 10 years ago of the network company. And we have talked to the distribution companies in particular about the need for the culture shift they're trying to create in their own business, making sure that that flows through to their subcontractors as representatives. I think so. Is enough work being done there to do that, or you think more needs to be done? In your,
I think certainly the landscape has changed from a subcontractor doing distributor work model. I mean, as you said, there's a lot more subcontractor engagement now to do what was very much distributor own work. But yeah, I think there can always be a little bit more. I think distributors are relying a lot on automated technologies, CRMs, email notifications. I know our members get bombarded with email notifications from a number of sources, not just distributors. I mean, we're probably guilty of it somewhat ourselves about just death by email, and I guess we all probably get death by email in our own respective roles. But it's certainly with COVID in particularly in New South Wales, that face-to-face engagement has sort of waned a bit for obvious reasons. We can't, but and I don't think there's much face-to-face engagement with contractors in other states either. It's very much a here's the information, you understand it yourself or your own way. And yeah, I think a bit of face-to-face engagement is what electrical contractors thrive on. They want that. They don't. They haven't got time to read emails. One-man band, smaller businesses, that kind of thing.
The same. So back to you then, Kate, on that same subject. I mean, how are the transmission companies and distribution companies going? It's, you get death by communique. Are they putting enough boots on the ground to deliver the kind of social license outcomes that we need, or does more need to be done there, or is it the way they're going about it? Some of the things that they could do better.
Well, I'm based in the central west of New South Wales, near the rollout of the Central West Arana Res, and I know that Transmed's been working really hard, but COVID restrictions have really limited the level of community engagement they've been able to do over the last sort of 3 or 4 months at least. So I know, looking at some of the contentious ones down in Victoria, they've got the Western Vic project down there. We think that there was a bit of a failure in that process down there, where AEMO is the jurisdictional planner, as opposed to in most of the other states where the major transmission company in that state is the jurisdictional planner. We find that a lot of the decisions making about where the transmission lines will be going is already done before the community becomes aware that there is in fact a transmission line proposed for their area. So the RIT-T process, regulatory investment test for transmission, which is a cost benefit analysis that transmission companies have to do, which is run by the Australian Energy Regulator in most jurisdictions. That process already runs through, and there is community consultation in it, but unfortunately most landholders don't find out about it. It's not until the state planning and assessment process, where they have the EIS or ES, in environmental impact statement, where the companies start consulting on actual routes, and that they found out, the landholders find out then that, oh, hang on, a project's been largely approved within a corridor, and that corridor potentially affects my land, and I'm going to potentially have transmission powers on my property, and I didn't know about it, and I haven't had a chance to make a lot of input. So we've been advocating that a greater degree of consultation occurs earlier in the process and during the RIT-T process. There's been some recent changes to national electricity rules. The Energy Security Board put through a change that would mean that when the ISP integrated system plan projects are being designed, there should be some early consultation at a large level, back at a high level, back at that process right at the very beginning as well. So we'd say, you know, yes, that those new changes that are coming with the ISP are important, but particularly through the regulatory investment test. And we potentially even go as far as to suggest that you could put the effects of social license into the regulatory investment test. So having a new line item for the costs of a transmission project into the RIT, and that would be recoverable, a way of recovering some of the costs of paying landholders more. So yeah, that's I guess yeah, the main failure we see at the moment is not enough consultation, but I do recognise that there is not enough consultation early enough in the process, but I do recognise that COVID's been a big part of that.
Well, it's a complex set of issues, Kate, and it seems like you're right across them. One final comment from me is that the situation you described too means that not all the costs are included in the cost benefit analysis, particularly when you do the environmental impact statement and line route assessment after the AERs have virtually approved the project. We then see potentially more costs coming in. So these sorts of improvements you're talking about to the process, I think, are absolutely spot on.
Thanks very much, Kate. Look, we're fast running out of time, and a number of people have already apologised that they had to leave. So it's really important that we hear from, if anyone has anything that they haven't said or want to make any comments, this is your chance. So just let me see if there is anyone who wants to make any final comments. But that certainly has been.
If I may, Claire, then just as I know we're coming to the close, as I say, just the other part of the next stage, acknowledging the high levels of what we anticipate is debt sitting there for people. Any strong views you've got at this point about who has responsibility for what, signatories, government, state, federal, in terms of protections for those most at risk? Jeff, anything just to put you on the spot there? If there's anything you want to particularly push for at this time?
There's not really anything. We've been quite happy with the government's response here, and that's been in partnership with the retailers and also with the community sector. So from an ACT perspective, I think we're doing okay. Yeah.
And so your theme is the one where you've got large footprint providers, retailers. Can they design their engagement to be at that more local jurisdictional level?
Yeah, I think that lack of community connection is a really big gap for the new entrants. I guess as well, just to offer to the IAP as well, given that there's if there's ever any use or value in us connecting you with some of the other community organisations that are mentioned by ActuAGL or anyone else, feel free to get in touch and we can see if it's useful to connect you and arrange a meeting or whatever's valuable. Or
Thanks.
Thanks, Jeff. Anything else from you, Cass?
No, look, it's been a really rich discussion. Thank you very, very much for it. I think those early themes that came through about the importance of clarity of communication and the sort of, you know, how transformative it was to have more plain English communications and particularly also translation material and engagement processes. So we will, you know, I'm not writing the report today, but I'm certainly I think we know that there's been extra effort to do some of that over the last 12 months, and we obviously want to help support that to become more systemic as well. So I particularly noted that. Thanks, Claire.
Andrew, anything from you?
Just thank you, everyone, for your time and your openness and honesty. It's some really good ideas and some really great work being done in communities. The only other thing I would add is that I'm still picking up a sense of anxiety around what comes next. and whether the improved behaviour, if you like, a way of putting it, of the industry during COVID, does that signal a culture shift within organisations, or is it just a transient thing associated with dealing with COVID, and then we go back to what it was 18 months ago? I think there's a level of anxiety that maybe we go back to where it was and we haven't really seen a culture shift. Hopefully we have seen a culture shift, and some of these things that they're doing now are BAU, and I guess that will be the great challenge for the industry, it is to make it BAU.
Thank you. And let me also add, I think that's been a really rich discussion, and I think some of the comments in the chat room have also reinforced that. And to me, it just said, and I think the attendance of so many industry people as observers reinforces that message that these problems are not solved by anyone alone, and that it really is about working with people on the ground like your organisations, and listening to your organisations and working with community advocates, rather than just delivering a service without that sort of consultation. So we will take your suggestions away. Our report, we still have other forums to go through. We then have individual meetings with each of the CEOs of the signatory organisations, and those will be available on the IAP website. We would also appreciate any written submissions if you want to follow up with anything, even if it's in the form of, dot points. We know how busy you are and how time poor everyone is, but if there's anything that you want to put in writing, again, the address for submissions is on our website. But it has been extremely valuable. We really appreciate your time, and we will let you know that the report, I think, is published early in December, late November. I've forgotten the date, but we'll let you know. Your input has been really valuable in the way that we write the report this year. So thank you very much for your time, your attendance, and your contributions. So thank you. We'll call it a day then. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thanks for your time.